Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast. And the IndyCar season may have ended, and as me and Archie know all too well, it's time for the 6 months of the grueling off-season. But as we said last week, we are still here. We will be here for the next 6 months. We're reviewing the season, doing all the fun off-season bits in between. We're looking forward to the future. And as we sort of highlighted last week, it's going to be the new era for a podcast, just me and Archie going forward. But we're going to have various guests join us along the way. This is the big one, the season review. We've got 6 months of racing to recap. We've got 17 races plus the thermal to review. So we have called along extra help for this week. So we're joined by James Scott, writer for SingleSeaterSpace.co.uk. James, it's great to have you on. I hope you enjoyed the season and are ready to talk all things IndyCar.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. It was good, kind of went down to the last race, and we got, essentially 18 things to get our teeth into, ready to get going.
So as sort of the theme we did last year, we've got various different categories. We've all selected our own picks for these categories. We'll do a few more sort of in-depth stuff at the end. We've also got a bit of news from this week, which we'll also cover at the end. And eventually we'll go into some little off-seasoning content and preview what we're going to do for the next 6 months, just so you are all aware. But let's start off with our driver of the season. Now, listeners last week would have probably caught halfway through me and Archie's little spoiler in towards the next week. So, James, let's start off with you. Who did you pick as your driver of the season for this year?
Well, I wanted to look past Alex Palou because it's obviously very easy just to pick up the champ. Going back to back as an IndyCar champion for the first time since Dario Franchitti did it in the same number 10 Chip Ganassi Racing Honda that Palou himself has just done. And I actually have kind of picked out Colton Herta just because I said in pre-season when I was having a look at what could go on, and Colton Herta has always seemed to never quite hit the mark. He finished third in the championship in 2020, but since then it's been a fleeting display, having finished fifth in 2021 and then other bits and pieces. He's never quite grasped a full campaign, and this year I felt like he managed to string it together. Granted, Andretti were much stronger on their Achilles heel, which was the short ovals, and with was it 6 of the last 8 rounds being on ovals, he really had to get something from it, and in the end winning in the city where he now lives, in Nashville, with a pretty stunning move with just 5 laps to go, that kind of epitomized his season. And in the end, picking up second in the championship was about the best he could do in equipment that was pretty strong, but kind of just below the top level over the course of the season. When looking past Alex Palou, and he is the best driver over the course of the campaign, I was most impressed by Colton Herta, and so that's why he gets my driver of the season award, despite missing out on the championship by just over 30 points.
Yeah, it's quite hard to sort of look past Alex Palou because at the end of the day, he did have yet another almost superhuman season. He had, what was it at the end? 13 top 5s across the course of the season. It wasn't quite as flashy in many ways, only the 2 wins compared to the 5 last year. What sort of is surprising is throughout the course of the entire year, Palou he only had 6 podiums, and you sort of think for such a serial finisher that he'll have a better record. But as me and Archie touched on last week, and our picks are the same, I go into mind is Scott McLaughlin, and you look back at St. Petersburg and we know what happened. And the story of the matter is, if it wasn't for that, McLaughlin, we'd be here reflecting on McLaughlin as the IndyCar champion instead of Alex Palou. And yes, you can equate for her to Power, O'Ward, Dixon, where if this didn't happen, they would be champion. And you can always make that case. You can make the case for Palou. He'd be much more dominant if he didn't crash an eye. He'd be much more dominant if he didn't have that issue at Milwaukee. But McLaughlin's you feel it's slightly different because it was a race he did finish, and it was a scenario where he didn't gain a significant competitive advantage at the end of the day. However your stance on it is, McLaughlin did not gain a significant competitive advantage by using the push to pass of 1 second. But you can take that into account and take that logically, but there's so many other factors to look into. I mean, McLaughlin has, I think, got quite comfortably the strongest oval driver this season. Won 2 oval races, as we know, and he was pretty much on pole. He was on pole at 1 Milwaukee race, 1 Iowa race, the Indy 500 and Gateway, which is pretty impressive. 2nd in Gateway, 3rd in Iowa. Really good Indy 500 run. And he just looks like the complete package. You obviously know he won in Barber as well. Got 3rd podiums, Road America, Mid-Ohio, another one in Iowa. So his results were really impressive. And again, Toronto, if he didn't get crushed out by his teammate in a really clumsy move. Yes, he made his own mistakes. We look at Detroit, we look at the Uniseca, but for stuff that was out of people's control, McLaughlin was the most effective. I think McLaughlin was really good last year, but I feel there's been another step made up, and it's hard to overlook St. Petersburg because it just was so factorial in the championship. But the strides McLaughlin's made, like weekend to weekend, if you compared him and Pelot, I'd probably say he was quicker the majority of the time. It's just maybe race execution let him down on occasion, but that's why I've gone for McLaughlin.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of echo everything you say. It did feel like a season where like all of the kind of the front running drivers had some sort of, moment of misfortune or strife. And I do just, as you said, see McLaughlin's as a real kind of accentuating circumstance in many ways. It's not like Pelot getting caught up at Detroit, because on that sort of occasion, or Pelot at Milwaukee, for instance, you don't know where he was going to end up finishing that race. We know definitively Scott McLaughlin was the third place finisher in this race. I mean, he was all over the back of Pato O'Ward finished second, into. He was all over the back of O'Ward. He probably should have finished second in that race, really, but didn't want to risk it, obviously, in the opening race of the season. So that it isn't like a normal stroke of bad luck. He had plenty of that too, obviously. He, after the first two rounds, was sat on 5 points because he had the mechanical in Long Beach as well. And Toronto, you mentioned, Dan. I think, he will also look, and I know he will look at kind of, oh, well, I made the error at Laguna Seca, for instance, where he crashed into power, made the error where he crashed in Detroit as well, obviously. But, he feels like, I think he's had as much kind of this innocent adversity as any driver's really had. I don't pin the blame on him with the push to pass thing. I think he clearly realised by the fact that he used a mere second of it. He made those couple of errors, and he'll probably feel he has to cut those out. But at the end of the day, every driver makes errors. Like, I think this season feels like the year that he really made that kind of step up to being a complete driver. I think, I've predicted him as my champion the last 2 years. I think last year was maybe jumping the gun a little bit. But I mean, even this year, it's still only the fourth season he's had in single seaters. And for successive years now, he's been the top Penske car. He's been the top Chevy car. I just think that's so impressive. I mean, I think he was a good oval driver. Don't get me wrong. I think Gateway last year, when he got the pole ahead of Newgarden, was kind of the breakthrough for him. And then that just continued into this year. Obviously, Nashville was the only oval weekend where he didn't get a pole. Obviously, got those couple of wins as well. I think he probably was the best oval driver in the field this year. So, this feels like the season he's kind of become the all-round IndyCar driver. He's the peak level was higher than it was last year as well. Obviously, last year he got a single win. He's got 3 this year. So, I mean, when it wasn't for those few races of adversity, he didn't finish any lower than 8th. So, when he wasn't struck by something, he was super consistent, and he didn't really have any, let's say, off days. Really, he was either struck down by the occasional error, a bit of misfortune. So,
and it's a real step up from both. And if McLaughlin wasn't disqualified from St. Petersburg, he would have won the championship with Countback, which is fascinating. I know you got all the various different factors of how Nashville would have run, but it's fascinating. And look, they've all made a huge step up in performance. I've got so many drivers have made a huge step up in performance this season that is so notable across the field. And I know it's early, but McLaughlin's already comfortably my championship pick for next year because he looks complete on every single type of course, every challenge thrown at him. He's so good at. Must be a New Zealand thing. They're all such good at adapting to race cars, whether it's Shane Van Gisbergen or it's McLaughlin. So there's only picks there, but let's bring it on nicely to our surprise of the season. Archie, let's take off of you this time.
I mean, to be fair, the driver that I'm going for could easily also be in the driver of the season discussion, but I think just because it was so unexpected, the way that he performed, it's got to be, I think, Santino Ferrucci, and I guess kind of by extension, AJ Foyt Racing in general. I know Stingray Rob struggled, but I think next year when they have the 2 charges of Ferrucci and Malukas, they will kind of be 2 guys fighting for top 10, top 5 in the championship. But I think just the gains that Ferrucci made from last season to this season, I mean, he was 19th in the standings last year. He gained 10 places this season, which is it's pretty unprecedented, that with the same team going from year to year. I think it's only the second time in his career that he's been with a team for a second season. And he finished in the top 10 once last season. That was a podium in the Indy 500, if you count a podium in the Indy 500, because I know they don't really do that. But I mean, otherwise, there were the team was nowhere all of last year. And yeah, I think he finished in the top 15 last season 3 times, and this year he's finished in the top 10. What is it, 11 times? I think I'm right in saying. So it's just an astonishing upturn, really. I mean, yeah, for comparison, Scott Dixon was in the top 10 only 10 times in 17 races this season. So I guess that kind of puts it into perspective. He also got the first pole for the team in over a decade, obviously. And that was without qualifying even really being the team's strong point. And yeah, okay, there's no getting away from the fact that Santino Ferrucci is a controversial guy. He had his controversial moments this year, but I think this year was a real proving ground, and really, I think he proved his talent this year. And okay, the Penske Alliance fed into this upturn for Foyt, but you can't account that for everything. I wouldn't say. I think obviously Michael Cannon's worked some magic by all accounts there, and I just think, I mean, going forward with Malukas at their disposal as well, I think you've got to think next year they'll be fighting for podiums and wins, really. Yeah, I think Ferrucci is my surprise by a landslide, really.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree, but for the sake of being different and not speaking about the same things in the podcast, I'll pick up my back up for it. I think Ferrucci sort of has to be for everyone. I mean, as you said, 19th to 9th for the standings is such an achievement, especially with all the top 10s he's got, and he's clearly taken a step forward. I'm going to go a bit left field as my second pick. Connor Daly, I thought was a great surprise, and sort of his return to the series. His Indy 500, I think, was a bit frustrating. It didn't quite go the way he panned out. Obviously, had an annoying qualifying and was just a strategy the whole race. But his time with Hunkos was really respectable. He got 2 top 10s. Look, Canapino didn't do that in 1.5 years at the team, as well as a 13th place. And actually, that was better than any of Canapino's results bar 1 this season. So, and obviously, we'll know the podium in Milwaukee was super special. And look, he comfortably led that 78 into the leader circle. It was only 1 point off the Malukas Blomqvist and Castroneves car, which is pretty impressive, and did exactly what he needed to do. And I wouldn't say he's a contender for driving market next season, but after all what's been said about Connor Daly on Twitter, he's not good enough, why do teams keep him recruiting? He sort of just proved why. Look, I might be a super sub, but I'm a reliable super sub, and every time he's been a super sub, he's got the job done. So that was a nice little surprise seeing Connor Daly back and performing so valiantly.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, I mean, he's actually coming up later for me. But yeah, Archie, I've got written down literally AJ Foyt Racing, because I think the biggest thing for me with the surprise of the season was more the fact that I'm just going to compare the 2 Iowa races from 2023 versus 2024, and the fact that Ferrucci finished 6 laps down in 2023. And teammate Peterson, I think, was 9 laps down in race 1 before they eventually waived that car for being too slow. And the fact that Ferrucci finished 6th and 11th at Iowa, that's leaps and bounds from where they were 12 months ago. And actually, my surprise of the season, I've gone perhaps even more left field than Danny. I'm actually not picking a team or a driver. My surprise of the season is actually how well IndyCar raced at both Milwaukee and at Gateway. I was really impressed with the racing at Gateway, because in 2023, it was pretty tough at times to watch. I mean, with Dixon just stuck behind Stingray Rob executing, I mean, one of the all-time great performances, but then at the same time, watching Newgarden and O'Ward fresh out the pits on fresh tyres, unable to get anywhere near like the lap traffic and get round just because of the marbles. Watching Gateway this year was a much more pleasant experience, really. And then I was a little bit skeptical with how the IndyCars were going to race at Milwaukee, but actually they're arguably two of the best races of the year. High line, low line, everything worked nicely. The fans turned up as well, and it was just a really, really good event.
Listeners of the podcast, or the race reviews, I should say, will be familiar with our Unsung Hero Awards. So at the end of each race, me and Archie crowned sort of a driver who had quite an underrated weekend that we thought deserved a little mention in the limelight. So we're going to do the same again for the season. I know it's a bit hard over the course of the season, but I haven't gone first yet. So I'll begin with mine, which is Carl Kirkwood. 7th place in the standings. His obviously best finish in the standings. And look, last year he got 2 wins. This year he got none. But I think Kirkwood still made a clear step up in performance. There was the whole, he's only top 5s of wins for the whole of last season, where you look at this season and now he's got 5 top 5s under his belt. He's now got an oval pole under his belt. Yes, he only got 1 podium at Toronto, but Kirkwood was significantly more consistent. I mean, you look at last season, he had 6 top 10 finishes When you look at this season, he had 13. So the difference is staggering there. And because Kirkwood hasn't had flashy results, nobody's really noticed him. He has gone under the radar. But yes, Herta sort of took the Andretti limelight, but it is only Kirkwood's second year in the team. And I thought he performed pretty well. And it was a clear improvement in performance. Yes, he didn't have the wins, but the consistency's there. And as I said last year, you don't win championships by winning races. You win championships by being consistent, which is what Alex Palou has shown over the last 2 years. And at the end of the day, that is the most important thing. So unsung for me was Carl Kirkwood. One podium, but still a great year, I think, in many ways.
He was first on my honourable mentions list for this. I completely agree. I think this has been a really valuable year for him. And I think he was speaking after taking that pole as well at Nashville. And I think he kind of was essentially insinuating that this year was probably for him almost as impressive as last year, where he stepped into Andretti in his sophomore year, got those couple of wins. So, yeah, I agree there. I've also got Linus Lundqvist on my unsung heroes list, Christian Rasmussen for getting that car in the leaders circle, Toby Sowery for his performances with Dale Coyne Racing in that revolving door entry. But this one, and me and Dan were discussing this person off recording, it's actually going to be Rinus VeeKay. He came home 13th in standings, which I know is kind of unremarkable in some ways, but he had so many issues early in the season. I felt like there were points through kind of the early mid phase of the season where we were just talking about this happened to VeeKay, that happened to VeeKay. He had this sort of thing fail on his car. I just felt really sorry for him. And, you know, by the end of the season, he picked up a bit of a head of steam and ended up with 7 top 10 finishes. He only got 2 last year. I mean, Ed Carpenter Racing, let's be frank, they really struggled last year. They were searching for performance. They'd been Connor Daly. Okay, I think bringing Ryan Hunter-Reay in maybe did VeeKay some good, but I don't think it really changed anything performance-wise for the team. But yeah, they made a bit of a step forward this year, but I think VeeKay really kind of stood out in the second half of the season for me. I think 5 top 10 finishes in the final 8 races, didn't finish any lower than 14th in that kind of run of races. Look, in the championship, he ended up beating a couple of pretty decent enough Ganassi cars, beat Marcus Ericsson. He was only 6 points behind Felix Rosenqvist as well, who I feel like Rosenqvist had quite a lot of misfortune, kind of almost in equal measure to VeeKay in the end. So, you know, he still finished no higher than 12th in the standings. He still finished no lower than 14th in the standings, which I know, Dan, you kind of use this as a stick to beat him with, and you're probably not the only one. But I actually think for a team that's kind of struggled a bit for consistency and performance, that is really good consistency from VeeKay. And I think, unfortunately, his options have kind of diminished elsewhere, and it looks like maybe he could well stay at Carpenter Racing. But I really just want to see him go somewhere else to kind of just see his true level, because what's he going? He's going into his 6th year with Ed Carpenter Racing if he stays there. And that team over the years has kind of been a team where, you know, it's housed drivers to nurture young talents and kind of allow them to develop. And I think ultimately, yeah, they're great at the Indy 500, but they're never going to be a title-winning force. And I'm a big believer that VeeKay would, if it came to it, slot in at a Penske or somewhere and be a front runner and really excel in that role. And unfortunately, while for as long as he stays at Ed Carpenter Racing, we're not really going to see that. But I do feel this year he stepped up pretty nicely as the team leader. And yeah, I mean, he was within a matter of, I think it was 12 points or so of finishing a career best 11th in the standings as well.
Hello, everybody. It's Future Dan, joined by Future Archie. And after this excellent monologue from Archie about Rinus VeeKay's 2024 season, the news has broke that he will be leaving Ed Carpenter Racing at the end of the season. So good timing. That's why we're here in the future.
You could not write it, could you? So yeah, we recorded this episode preemptively on Friday, thinking, oh, it's the weekend, there won't be any more news coming out. How wrong we were. About 2 hours after recording, well, about 11 p.m. probably, there was a report from Racer. This still isn't, as we record 1 day later, actually confirmed by Ed Carpenter Racing. But yeah, there was a report from Racer that indeed Rinus VeeKay was going to be leaving Ed Carpenter Racing after 5 years with the team, rather than, as I kind of spoke about in the segment you've just listened to, staying with the team for a 6th year. And I mean, we've not got any inside information on whether VK was going to stay or not, but it certainly looked like options were narrow for him elsewhere. So I think by kind of just deduction, you would have said he would stay, but nope. Marshall Pruitt dropped this bombshell. Apparently, according to that report, it was a surprise to VK, who had been negotiating a new deal as recently as kind of the aftermath of Nashville Super Speedway, the finale. So yeah, I mean, it was all very late. I'm not sure why they're doing it so late. I think if you are letting the driver go, you need to tell them early so they have as much time to put a contingency plan in place. And yeah, it leaves VK in a pretty precarious position. You know, I can imagine he probably isn't too happy. You've got to imagine budget and finances is a factor. VK doesn't bring a budget, and that car was extremely bare, that number 21 Chevy, for the majority of the season. Does this mean Christian Rasmussen comes under threat as well if they are in such a kind of, I don't know, dire financial situation by inference? But yeah, I mean, looking at the move kind of as a whole, after 5 years, kind of as I said in the previous segment, it feels like the right time for another chapter. But I'm just very shocked that it was the team who seemingly like instigated this parting of ways. And unfortunately, there's not really like a top team option out there for VK. You know, all seats that are left are kind of below that premium bracket, and frankly, options are closing quickly. So, yeah, I'm interested. I'm interested to see where he ends up, if he ends up anywhere. I'm interested to see if he was to end up somewhere else, how he would perform there, because driving for a second team in IndyCar kind of would be a better way to gauge just a true idea of his level as a driver. But yeah, it's a matter of where. Juncos, the one paid RLL seat. I mean, it all feels like kind of sideways moves, doesn't it? But we are left with a lot of good free agents at the moment. VK, Rossi, Lundqvist. Makes me pretty fearful that somebody very good may end up without a seat.
This happened 7 minutes after I said, I also hope we get no more news between now and Tuesday. Which
it's impeccable. It's impeccable. That's going to go down. That's going to go down in our podcast folklore, I think.
So that wasn't ideal. But looking at the news, like, if you told me this news 2 months ago without the context of it being a team's decision, I wouldn't particularly be surprised. And I think for Renus, it probably is the right move. I know it probably isn't the way it's come about, and you probably wouldn't want to do it this late in the market. But as you said, we have no idea the level he's at for 4 years. Like, he's beaten Rasmussen, but he's expected to do that. Then the question is who comes in to replace him, and I think the suggestions are Alexander Rossi and Stingray Rebellion. Obviously, we don't know. This isn't confirmed. It probably will be confirmed on the day this is released. But again, that's not gospel. But I think money's a big factor, and there's been a sort of rumor that Stingray Rob and Alexander Rossi will be a pair, both managed by Rossi's dad. Rob brings a lot of funding. Rossi's a top-class driver. There's been suggestions that Juncos have been looking at pairs. There's been suggestions RLL looking into the pair. If we're going to match up all the puzzle pieces, is this a potential pair where Rob's bringing loads of funding to the team and Rossi's coming in for that experience?
Yeah, just in the hypothetical that it is Rob and Rossi replacing Rasmussen and VK, I would say, I mean, as much as Rossi is a better driver than either of them, I think when you consider the potential, I think you can still say VK, you're kind of looking at him and thinking about the potential. And Rasmussen, kind of the trajectory he was on through the year and has been on through the year. Yeah, I would say they are still, as a kind of well-rounded lineup, probably the stronger, but ultimately money talks in this business, and it's a brutal and pretty cruel aspect of motorsport.
But as you said, he brings the budget, and for a team where we saw them sponsorless so much of the year, we had that sort of sponsor allegations early on, and the leader circle always seems so desperate for them. That is important, and if it's going to secure Ed a future for the year, I mean, he's got to take it in many ways. I mean, the question is, what does Ed do? Is he going oval only? Is he going Indy 500 only? I think the fact he withdrew himself into last year is quite a big statement in regards to that. Rossi definitely won't be doing a part-time season if they bring in him. Will Rob do a part-time season? Well, it's better than not being on the field, but he was a lot better at ovals than he was at road courses throughout the course of the last season. So if he was yes, you're bringing in for budget more than his driving ability. But at the end of the day, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but a Rob Carpenter combo you'd think would have serious leader circle issues potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think Carpenter will step back to Indy 500 only. He wouldn't. I doubt if he had ambitions of coming back to run the ovals again next year, he would have withdrawn himself from the situation this year. I think it feels like the natural time to do that, in my opinion.
I've written Christian Rasmussen because I think to be thrown into that final stretch of pure ovals, having not driven one in an IndyCar, was quite a tall order. And I know that he was definitely a better option than Ed Carpenter, because I believe that certainly gone are the days that a driver can just jump into an IndyCar with an hour of practice and expect to be competitive. I know that we have like road and street course only drivers, which is a personal gripe of mine, along with having oval only drivers. But I do think that Christian Rasmussen did just a really, really good job eventually hauling that car into leader circle. And he was probably the highlight of the Indianapolis 500 for me. And I know that wasn't in the 20 entry, which almost cost that car the position in the leader circle itself. But he was my unsung hero, along with Connor Daly, who's probably actually now a sung hero rather than being an unsung one, because actually the fact that he hauled Hunkos so far above the cut line essentially means that people, quite a few people are singing his praises, and perhaps his market value might have increased just a touch for next year. But I'm thinking Christian Rasmussen as my unsung hero, just because he had a lot of misfortune towards the start of the season. So the fact that being given such a difficult task and he managed to pull it off was a testament to his abilities.
I mean, that was a big monologue from me on VK, just because I do genuinely believe that if he went to a top team, he would be right on par and be competitive with them, which I know is quite hard to say when he's been at Ed Carpenter Racing for 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a good thing, but with all respect, he's IndyCar's most forgettable driver, I'd say. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing, I don't think.
Yeah, apart from May, but I will also get onto that in a bit.
And all the coin NPCs. So remember Colin Brown or Tristan Vautier or
Luca Giotto?
Colin Brown drove this season. That feels like a lifetime ago.
It does feel like a lifetime ago. That's the only thing that feels like a lifetime ago. Everything else feels like it's gone by like alarmingly quickly.
Who knows? Right. Transfer driver. This was one of the storylines coming to the season. New faces and new places, as they were dubbed. We had Felix Rosenqvist at Meyer-Shank, Marcus Ericsson at Andretti. We had Roman Grosjean at Hunkos. We had Jack Harvey at Dale Coyne Racing. We had Stingray Rob at AJ Foyt Racing. I'm probably missing somebody else, but that's the ones off the top of my head. If I miss someone, please correct me. But quite a mix there. We had David Malukas actually at Aaron McLaren at the start of the season, but we know how that one fared. I knew I was missing one. There we are. He was still a transfer driver. It wasn't him. He was the best transfer driver of the year. He's moved to Aaron McLaren. I feel we might be pretty similar, but Felix Rosenqvist, I think. Look, it's quite hard to say. Ericsson had a disappointing year. Grosjean, we didn't expect too much of anyway. He was okay. Rob's year was pretty awful in many ways, as was Harvey's. So I think Rosenqvist is the easy choice. And look, it's a bit of a shame Rosenqvist year. He started off so well. Had that pole in Long Beach. He had the front row in St. Petersburg. Yep, he ran really well at the Thermal, claiming third place. I know that doesn't count, but fourth in Alabama. And this was after the Indy 500, he was running really well and had that mechanical failure. It sort of felt like that ended up being the story of his year, qualifying really well, running at the front and just having some sort of issue. Was it Iowa? I remember he was running quite well until he had some sort of mechanical issue. Nashville, he was obviously running the top 3 before he had his issue. So he only had one top 10 since Detroit, but he had such awful luck. It's quite hard to quantify that. But he had such a great start to the year. And look, when you compare to how Shank performed last year, it is a huge step up in performance. And Rosenqvist has been really important in changing that team. And in the last week, he's extended his contract with the team, which makes complete sense for him. It gives him the security, sort of lacked of Aaron McLaren having a long-term IndyCar future. And he's exactly the type of driver the team needed to lead forward with. Look, the whole team had one top 10 the entirety of last season. Rosenqvist got 4 in the first 4 races, a further 2, and Malukas got a further 2 than that. So, I mean, I think Rosenqvist had a good season as a driver, but I feel like his impact on the team has also been really noticeable from that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I've also put Rosenqvist, so I guess I'll carry on from there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember him really making a mistake all year. It just seems like all of these kind of errant results have come from something going wrong. I mean, I guess Nashville kind of ends it off pretty nicely in that regard with a cut tire ending the season, because it just feels like that sort of things happen so often. And I mean, he was tracking for top 10 in points really before it petered out. And I mean, yeah, if things continued on that trajectory, he probably would have been top 10 in the standings at the detriment of, well, Rossi was 10th in the end, wasn't he? I think.
Yeah.
I think it's ultimately a year that needs a bit of perspective as well. Like 6 top 10 finishes compared to how it started may look disappointing, but when you compare that to, yeah, as you said, only a single top 10 for the entire team last season that's a big upturn. Like, it's the same thing in qualifying as well. Like they qualified in the top 10, I believe, twice last year. Rosenqvist was on the front row for the first 2 races. I think he started inside the top 10 11 times, I've got noted down. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, to have Long Beach earlier in this really early in the season, get that pole. I think Thermal was obviously big. I know it didn't count for points, but I still think that's pretty big for the team to get the pole in his group, win his heat, get on the podium in the end. And yeah, I think it's his leadership that's really been a big thing as well. He's really stepped up for the first time in his IndyCar career as that sort of team leader. I think I guess it's evidenced by the multi-year deal that the team really loves him, and he gets to reunite with Ganassi last year, a team that never really intended to let him go. So I think it'll only go better for him. It's been, impressive.
Rosenqvist qualified in the top 5 8 times.
That's super impressive. That's super impressive.
Yeah, I mean, Rosenqvist, he is probably the standout of a slightly underwhelming bunch, I guess. And with that, I think there'll be big, not pressure, but over the next 18 months, I'd expect you'd hope that Shank had the same kind of rise that Foyt have had. The 2 powerhouse teams in IndyCar, Chip Ganassi Racing and Team Penske. If Team Penske can drag an AJ Foyt car, which, let's face it, over the last 5 or 6 years, you've been looking at that either the ABC or the Rocket Chevrolet and thinking, get that thing off the road, especially on those short ovals where they're multiple laps down, and to put it into a top 10 contending car. Shank will be hoping that the similar sort of things will happen to them. And so, I've got my eye on Rosenqvist for the next 18 months. And I suspect that was why he was so determined to lock down his own deal, because he may be excited by the prospects ahead.
Yeah, really important signing, I think, for Shank, for both driver and team. As I said, it gives Rosenqvist that security. He never quite had at Aaron McLaren. There's always, you're out the next time we get Palou. Next year, Palou's coming in, so you're out. And then, but he's been a great addition to Shank, and I'm glad they kept him. Let's get on to, unfortunately, the other side of the equation, the disappointments of the season. Now, look, there's quite a lot here. There's quite a few I could go into, but I think my overall one will be Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing. Last year, there was potential. There were good signs. Lundgaard got his win in Toronto. Rahal got his pole in Indianapolis. He got his pole in Portland. Rahal almost won Indianapolis. And look, there were the bad moments, short ovals, Indianapolis 500. But coming into this year, it's, we got this new staff, that will change. You can't be any worse than last year. And it was. They were a shadow of what they were last year. Lundgaard was one of the hottest prospects on the market last year. He was probably one of my top 5 drivers of the season. It feels like we didn't see him this season. He got the 3rd place in the road course, but he got 6 top 10s throughout the entirety of the season, which I thought was a bit underwhelming. If you compare it to last season, he got, I believe it was 9 top 10s throughout the course of the season. And it was clearly a team issue because, look, Graham Rahal did not have a good season. 5 top 10s throughout the course of the year. I think it was his first ever season. He didn't get a top 5 in his entire IndyCar career, which is...
I don't know if I'm wrong. I might be wrong in saying this, but was this his worst ever season in terms of championship position as well? At least he was tracking for it at one point. It's
his worst since 2014. Okay. So, in a long time. And then we had Pietro Fittipaldi, who, to be honest, if he left the grid, I wouldn't even noticed. Didn't really do anything wrong, but he got no top 10s of anybody. Throughout the course of the season. His best finish was 13th. He got a 12th for the Thermal Club as well. But yeah, it was not a good season all round. Like Fittipaldi and Rahal were 19th and 18th in the standings. Lindgar was obviously a bit better than 11th, but from what? Well, the other thing is they didn't get any better at Indianapolis. They had 2 cars in on bump day. They had 1 car just survive the car. I know Sato qualified really well, but he was doing qualifying trim for the entirety of the practice.
And I think Graham said he had one hell of an engine or something as well. So
ironic. But yeah, like it wasn't any better. Rahal didn't get bumped just because there was somebody who was even worse than them because they crashed their tub. And we had Graham yet again saying it was the worst car he's ever driven on an oval, and it feels like he's saying that every other race for the last 2 years. So, yeah, it didn't get any better, and now they've been raided by the FBI. It's where to start with Rahal? It's been disaster after disaster.
I'll let you go, James, because you look like you agreed with this. But I just wanted to say, Thermal was one of their successes of the year, and they still managed to have 2 DNFs from the top 12 without even crashing.
Well, who was it? Fittipaldi? They had to refill him or something.
Yeah, he got disqualified, I think.
Fittipaldi got disqualified. Yeah.
Go on, James. You look like you agree with this.
Well, yeah. So I had Rahal Esman Lanigan again in brackets because we talked to Graham Rahal on the media day in January, and he talked a lot about the low-hanging fruits that they'd sorted, right? The fruits that, I mean, they genuinely did not pick up anything at all. And yeah, I've just been having a look at Graham Rahal's season stats, and they are pretty much the worst since he ran half the season in 2010. Championship position only just beaten. He finished, I think, 18th this season. And yeah, 19th in 2014. With the same number of races, but he actually scored 90 more points that year. So it really was not a good year for RLL. Granted, perhaps the Indianapolis 500 might have been double points, but even then, that still won't have been enough to turn the tide of what was a pretty miserable year. But actually, my biggest disappointment, again, not a team, not a driver, was how Iowa raced. I really enjoyed 2023 in Iowa, and my favorite part about the whole thing was David Malukas' tweet after the race. You know, the scene from Cars where Mac is pootling down the freeway, and then the four showy flashy cars come up and do their formation where they were zipping in and out of each other, and he just tweeted the 3 Penske cars at Iowa today, and that was pretty funny, and that kind of summed up 2023 because there were hundreds of passes in 2023, and I think the passing numbers were down by about 60% on 2023 than they were 2024, and
yeah,
that was despite the fact we
year,
had one of the races in the night.
Yeah, this year the passing stats, I think it was one of them was just shy of 200, one of them was just over 200, which is like they were in like the mid thousands last year. So
I didn't even know how we got that many overtakes because it felt like we didn't see any, but it was Ferrucci all on restarts just overtaking everybody like they weren't there. So
it felt like a PJ1 Texas 2021 type race, and well, I mean, it's almost a carbon copy of what has happened. They've repaved the track, and the IndyCar suddenly cannot find any kind of grip above a line that's 3 feet off the apron. And yeah, it was a tough watch at times, Iowa, because you know it's one of IndyCar's biggest events, like up there with Long Beach and, well, obviously not the Indianapolis 500 because that is the biggest, but up there with Long Beach is like a celebration of what IndyCar is, right? And Hy-Vee have done such an amazing job as a promoter of it, and the track looks great. And in 2023, it raced nicely. They put, am I right in saying both the races were on NBC this year? Which means was certainly one of them. They got Lee Diffie back for his final call in IndyCar. And you know, that shows the importance of Iowa, and to then have it be as disappointing as it was with such little action, and almost Diff, Townsend and James going, yeah, action will, you know, it is going to pick up, and it's almost in desperation, just because it was that disappointing. That was definitely my disappointment of the season, because I was really excited for Iowa, and I mean, I love oval racing, but I think Iowa is always one that can throw up that unpredictability just because of the nature of the bull ring and because lap traffic is such a key factor. But this year, they've basically just caught the lap traffic and then didn't pass it. And that was the end of that. So that's my disappointment this season because I really, really didn't love it.
My disappointment is Joseph Newgarden. I think it's quite difficult to judge this season. I think the word I would use is complicated. You know, it all started with this talk of this revised approach, all of this kind of scaling back he'd done over the off season, cutting things off track. You know, him and McLaughlin gave up doing bus bros, for instance, as kind of just a minor part of that. And he was kind of just looking to put less pressure on himself, maybe kind of get back to enjoying racing, I think were his words, after he was pretty disappointed with 2023. And, you know, here we go. He kicks off the season with pole and a win at St. Pete. He was utterly dominant. And, you know, he was chasing Dixon for the win then at Long Beach as well. But it ended up with fourth at Long Beach after he gets hit from behind by Herta, and he gets disqualified the day later from St. Pete. And then kind of from there, it feels like his season was just completely derailed, at least for a couple of months at least. It felt like, I don't know whether he was playing catch up and there was maybe some desperation. He just looked completely out of rhythm. He just had some races where he just didn't perform. And I think he admitted that himself. And off the back of St. Pete, it kind of reached the stage where he started to become villainized by the fan base a bit. He's getting booed at driver intros, apparently. And I can't help but feel this whole villainization of Newgarden has been a bit of a struggle for him, because I kind of do believe that he is a good guy. He's a good guy. He's a fierce competitor, but he's a good guy. And ultimately, we won't know the truth about St. Pete. I think all the mixed messaging after that was not useful. I'm inclined to believe that it is team culpability over kind of Newgarden and the drivers being at fault for it. And, you know, I think the whole villainizing thing just isn't something he embraces. And sport does need villains, but I think they have to be willing villains. And someone like Santino Ferrucci would be a willing villain, except for the fact that actually this year he's kind of almost evolved into this feel-good story because of where AJ Foyt Racing and their history have come from this kind of place of struggle to where they are now, where they're really competitive again. And, you know, I think Newgarden said as much himself when he was all the way back at the start of the season, talking about kind of all this scaling back and revising of approach that he'd done, that, you know, he is inherently an introvert. And I got to imagine he really struggles with being this kind of villain. And yeah, kind of from St. Pete onwards, it kind of just feels like it's underpinned his year. You know, after Long Beach, he finished outside the top 15 in 5 of the next 7 races. There was kind of a mix of that underperformance I spoke about. He made some errors. There were some things out of his control as well. I think I'm trying to remember what race it was. Where was it, Barber or Mid-Ohio, where he just seemed to go off track about 4 times, a bit like Grosjean last year.
Mid-Ohio was the one he was caught speeding the pits about 14 times. That
was the one I was thinking of, actually, because his race kind of went downhill there because he went off track, and then after that he was caught. Yeah, that was the one I was thinking about. But, you know, we're kind of looking at successive years here for Newgarden where he's kind of got the biggest achievement of all, winning the Indy 500, and that is a huge achievement. Winning it back to back, it hadn't been done in over 2 decades. But kind of both years, the reflection that we have, the reflection that he has, is that his season's not been what he hoped. He just wanted to see the end of it, basically. And, you know, he ended it a bit better. Iowa onwards, I think starting in Iowa, he was on the podium 4 out of the last 8 races. Probably could have been more because, I mean, Milwaukee, he was kind of innocently taken out of both of those. But even looking at Iowa, his dominance that he's had for the last few years has been wiped. And
do you remember post Long Beach, we were like, how is anybody going to topple this guy in a championship?
Yeah, I actually, that was the one thing in my notes that I didn't say, is that, yeah, I remember thinking after Long Beach, like, oh my God, Newgarden's going to run away with the championship here. Penske, obviously, last year, they struggled a little bit on road and street courses. They were kind of really focusing on improving to be in this spot this year where, I mean, they were with Power and McLaughlin. Obviously, Road America was the big one where they swept the podium. But yeah, you were really thinking, oh my God, Penske are formidable here. Even Ganassi can't kind of keep up with them. And yeah, it obviously wasn't to
times. I always find it hard with Newgarden because at the end of the day, he has won the race, which is bigger than the championship. So can you say he's had an underwhelming year when he has done something bigger than the rest of the year? But I guess when you're talking about the season, you have to take the 17 races into account, not just the biggest one. So it's you can look at it both sides of the coin. But look, I've got a whole bunch of disappointments I go on to. Stingray Rob was one who I thought was really disappointing. Dale Coyne Racing, I mean, the fact they didn't really get it together all year, no top 10s was pretty underwhelming. And I thought McLaren in some ways were pretty underwhelming throughout the course of the season. Let's go on to our favourite race of the year. I mean, for me, it's got to be the Indianapolis 500. Yeah. I mean, I love the sunset racing. I thought that was awesome, having the rain delay into sort of the dusk of Indianapolis. You had Carl Larson, the whole storyline there was absolutely awesome. And the race itself was incredible. I know it started off a bit feisty, but sort of when it I say calmed down, it calmed down accidents wise, but the racing got so much better. In the last 20 laps, you had Rossi, Dixon, Newgarden, O'Ward, four probably the best around the speedway, all battling out for the glory there. And look, as much as we've mentioned the pain throughout the year, I mean, it led us to an iconic moment and a final lap with 2 overtakes for the lead and one of the best calls I've ever seen from Diff. And you look back at it and like the crowd as well, the fact that it just erupts when Pato gets into the lead in the last lap. The whole thing was just an incredible moment for Newgarden as well. Sort of that redemption after St. Pete as well. From his standpoint, it was. I mean, it is the greatest spectacle in racing, and I feel like for every podcast for the next 10 years this will be our greatest race of the year. But I think it's so hard to overcome everything that can be taken into account for it.
Yeah, I think the lower temperatures definitely helped as well. It was, I mean, being at the sunset racing, as you say, it looked awesome, but it definitely helped. The cooler track temps, I think they were only around 85 degrees Fahrenheit, which sometimes IndyCar at the Speedway, when it tops to 110, 115, 120, I think it was in 2021, that track temp, it was tricky to pass just because of blistering on the tires and making it not just a fuel race, but also a tire race. But there was basically no tire concern because just of how cool it was, because it was late into the evening. And that was the 5th time there was a pass for the lead, I think, on the final lap of the Indianapolis 500. Even better that we've had 2 in a row. 2 in a row for Joseph Newgarden making overtakes on the final lap. But I mean, I tried to kind of put the Indianapolis 500 aside because I knew, I mean, it was by far the best race of the season, and one of those things where it definitely took your breath away. And I feel like, again, when it's bigger than the championship, it almost undermines kind of how good some of the other racing was and how intriguing that some of the racing is. Like, I feel like road and street course racing will never quite have the thrill that the Indianapolis 500 brings, just because you always know that there's going to be some kind of last lap pass. I think the last time we didn't have a pass for the lead on the final inside the final 5 miles was 2020. And so as a result, we've had 4 editions where it's gone down to the final 5 miles in a straight fight between 2 incredibly strong drivers, a driver that's got their car tuned in over the first 495 miles of the race in order to be in that position in the first place. And so, when you look past the Indianapolis 500, I've got written down Long Beach here, just because I spent the entirety of the race going, he couldn't, could he? He couldn't, could he? In terms of Scott Dixon. Oh, he has. And pulling off another masterful fuel economy run. And then I've written down Milwaukee again. We've already brushed on it. I know Archie mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk about it, and I suspect this is the segment where you fancy having a little chat about Milwaukee. But I thought that was again just a super event. I won't steal your thunder on that one. I've already talked about how pleased I was that Gateway raced as well as it did. And sometimes in IndyCar, when we have such thrilling races like the Indy 500, we do have to get brought straight back down to earth with a crash fest like Detroit. And as a result, it's fun in that weird kind of way that it makes everyone look slightly embarrassed, but at the same time, it was also a good race because you didn't know who was going to win. And when you don't know who's going to win, you also know who's going to win, because the answer is, of course, Scott Dixon. So, I thought there were some great races over the course of the season, but as you say, nothing will top a last lap overtake around the outside of turn 3 for Joseph Newgarden to win the 108th Indianapolis 500, because that was, as Diff said in the thing, mind-blowing.
I think I kind of use this to just say one of my biggest takeaways from the year has just been the oval racing's just absolutely brilliant, isn't it? I mean, I think when you reflect back and think what are the best races this season? And maybe it's recency bias to an extent because they have been the most recent races, but it is the oval races that kind of really stand out and really pop over any of the road and street races. I think obviously the Indy 500 kind of trumps it all. That is my overriding pick. I mean, how can't you pick it when it was one of the best Indianapolis 500s by all accounts of everyone who has been around longer than we have been? They're saying it's one of the best ever. So you can't not pick that. And I mean, I think all month there were storylines, weren't there? Even before the race, you had the whole Larson storyline, VK's qualifying heroics. I mean, you had quite a few crashes this year, kind of in the lead up to the race. But I think after all the anticipation through the weather delay on race day, it was just such an amazing show. I mean, so much passing, so many lead changes. I mean, Diff was left speechless on the commentary by what happened on that last lap. I mean, I think it was the most on-track passes in Indy 500. I reread my notes since 2017, and it really felt properly old school, elbows out. You had the aggro sort of style racing, as Townsend Bell said early on, and you had the incidents early on, and I guess the incidents are kind of part of the 500, but to have that long green stint to end the race, especially after the year before we had all the red flags late on, was really memorable in that setting of the low sun and so on. But yeah, I also wanted to give my mention for the late season oval races, and I think my race of the season outside the 500 is actually probably Gateway. I think just for the fact that it was the oval race that followed Iowa. There were real concerns after Iowa about the package with the heavier hybrid, tires that just weren't degrading at all, and just the upturn in spectacle that we saw at Gateway and again at Milwaukee after similar sort of skepticism was just really impressive. Milwaukee, for instance, we saw legitimate passes for the lead in those races, and it wasn't like it was super easy to pass, but I felt like it was a sort of race that kind of really brought the best out in the drivers, inspired some real skill and creativity to get those passes done. So yeah, I think both Gateway and Milwaukee were expected to be one-lane processional races. I guess Nashville to an extent as well, but Gateway to me was particularly important as the kind of bounce back from Iowa, and especially as you kind of said earlier, James, like Gateway's not been a great race traditionally, and this wasn't only a real upturn on a poor race at a track which usually provides one of the races of the season. It was a good race at a track that doesn't usually provide this sort of race, but you had these multiple strategies, you had multi-lane, side-by-side racing, traffic was a factor. It wasn't like Iowa where cars were just getting hemmed in and stuck behind traffic. They were passing, sort of siding through, carving through the traffic, passes for position, which is always nice, of course, as well. I think what capped off Gateway as well was kind of the aggro factor at the end with the late crash, the Power Newgarden clash. It just felt like everyone was really kind of hated each other that weekend. And yeah, no, I think they are Milwaukee and Gateway. I mean, it's hard to split them. Yes, of course, the 500 is the one, but I think it's just really meaningful that IndyCar Firestone kind of nailed the package so quickly after the introduction of the hybrid, and we saw passing records at all of these late season ovals after the real worries of Iowa.
Let's go on to a moment of the season. I feel there's quite a lot ahead. I think if you look back on the season, it will be Newgarden's move on the 500. But if anyone else wants to counter that, I've got a different one. If anyone else wants to kick off for this time, please take the floor.
I think Connor Daly's podium, just after all the things that were mentioned earlier about kind of the doubt online, people putting lists out, all the drivers I pick ahead of Connor Daly. And he really did his talking on track. And yeah, that was a heroic performance that really vindicated the decision that Juncos made. And it was fitting because Daly had obviously won Ricardo Juncos his first ever car championship in Star Mazda in 2010. And then to go and get him his first IndyCar podium as well was just a nice tale.
The two moments that I've got, they're both involved the same driver, right? But one is a really good moment and one isn't, right? So the good moment, this involves Colton Herta, and actually we talked about this actually off broadcast just on Sunday night after Nashville, was Colton Herta's pass on Pato O'Ward in in Nashville. It almost felt like the oval version of Schumacher and Hakkinen on Ricardo Zonta back in 2001 at Spa, where one went high, one went low past a lap car. And watching Colton Herta's on board, he was millimeters, if that. You couldn't put a piece of paper between him and Stingray Roll. And actually, I almost jumped off my seat whilst watching it, thinking he was destined to go airborne, a bit like he did in Iowa in 2020 or 2020, I think. And I was pretty sure Herta was going airborne with 5 laps to go, and instead he pulled it off and managed to get just enough alongside. That was a great pass. Obviously not quite matched by Newgarden, but it was definitely one that took your breath away. But when you say moment of the season, it didn't necessarily have to be a good moment of the season. And the most impactful thing I think that I've written over the course of the year was analysis of the Thermal Club and what went down there over the course of the weekend. And watching Colton Herta lap 9 seconds slower than the rest of the field in the final was definitely an experience to enjoy, because that just kind of highlighted how kind of ridiculous the whole thing was. And going from a double file restart where then nobody wanted to do anything for the first 10 laps before everyone queuing back up in the order that they had been, with Pietro Fittipaldi disqualified and Graham Rahal with problems. So basically only 10 cars on what would be, after Road America, the longest road course that IndyCar goes to, which, granted, there weren't any fans there, really. But if there had been, that would have been like cars go past for 10 seconds and then like a minute and a half of absolutely nothing going on. And then, watching then Herta kind of scythe his way up to 4th, it wasn't really going to materialize into anything, but it did just kind of put a stamp on how farcical the thermal format was, where they couldn't change tires after the 10 laps, and they had a single file restart, which also kind of killed any kind of action as well. So that's one of my most memorable moments from the season, is watching Colton Herta trundle around with, again, live on NBC, trying to big up this made for TV spectacle. And Hinch and Lee actually sounded so embarrassed talking about those that first 10 laps. That's something that will stick with me for quite a while. I think I wrote that something like the series' most exciting driver driving 9 seconds off the pace. It was a tough watch.
Pato O'Ward's victory in Milwaukee, I thought, was really significant. The whole Mexico thing was a complete disaster for the series. Not only NASCAR beating IndyCar to Mexico, considering IndyCar have a top level Mexican driver, whilst NASCAR's is a bit mid, was not good. And then the whole Mark Miles, Pato's not on billboards, he's not popular. Adrian Fernandez as well, clear of this guy. The fact he pretty much but he drove very comfortably to victory. And the whole Pato hoofing afterwards, I thought was great. And the merchandise and him putting it on billboards, his tweet with the billboard of the NASCAR trucks. I thought that was a great moment. I think it sort of vindicated Pato's popularity. It proved actually he is as popular as people make him out to be. And Adrian Fernandez is a thing of the past. And it gave us, in the bigger picture, I think that has led to quite a significant thing where IndyCar apparently are already talking to Mexico about a future race there. And it's sort of proved, hang on, the attitude needs to change. IndyCar needs to market their drivers more. They need to be more superhero-like. They need to sell their USPs of their drivers like Pato O'Ward or Alex Palou or Scott McLaughlin. And we're failing to do so. And I think O'Ward's win came such an important time for him, especially after those comments had been made. And look, he is by far the most popular driver in the field, and he proved why. And I think it not only was it significant from a personal standpoint, but I think it's given us and IndyCar's leadership a lot of reflection. Actually, what do we need to do differently in the future?
Bang on.
Nice. Simple.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, can I lead that into my story of the season?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Because I think the overarching, and I don't want to call it a cloud, but it kind of has been overlooking since the Penske push to pass standout, and even then kind of a little bit before that, kind of in the preseason, is a bit of a loss of confidence in the direction that IndyCar is going. And I think kind of when you piece it all together, and you look at like what's going on, and when you kind of add it up, over the course of this this last 12, 18 months or so, is just how disconnected the management is with the fans. And, you know, IndyCar removed their license with iRacing and signed with a failing Motorsport Games, which has gone about as well as you would expect. And then over the course of the winter, Honda threatened to pull out of IndyCar because of the rising costs, which I feel like has been brushed under the carpet slightly. Again, IndyCar, they said themselves, had a tumultuous winter, and then to go into a spring where, granted, that wasn't great either. Fortunately, the Indy 500 was like a little peak out of that, but then you go to a race in Detroit afterwards on USA, which had less than 10% of the viewers of the Indianapolis 500, and it was a bit of a circus. To then go into a slightly messy introduction to the hybrids with a chassis that was built in 2012, flinging an aero screen onto the car and a hybrid just to make the thing a lot heavier. Granted, it has raced well, but it has raced well because the drivers make the thing race well, not because I feel like there's more a driver input rather than a car input. And this whole thing with Mexico has reared its ugly head again. That this season really has felt like a loss of confidence in Roger Penske, Penske Entertainment, and Mark Miles. And I think you can balance the positives with what they've done, keeping the series and IMS afloat during COVID, and you know, take no Indy 500 ticket sales in 2020 is a massive hit on the financials. I mean, I'm no mathematician, but it's millions of dollars that go just like that in a flash, and having half capacity in 2021. That's been my story of the season, and it's almost like IndyCar keeps digging and it keeps pushing their luck with how far they are going to go before at some point this is going to go horrifically wrong. And, you know, you've had the calls for the series to be sold, and you know, they feel like they miss the mark all the time, and I don't quite get how it's possible that IndyCar keeps shooting itself in the foot. I mean, the introduction to Indy Split, written you know, about the car IRL split and how once again IndyCar should be miles ahead of stock car racing. The introduction of that book is written by Robin Miller just before he passed away in 2021, and it talks about how, in terms of speed, in terms of the history, and in terms of the technology that these cars possess, open wheel racing in America, in North America, should be far, far ahead of stock car racing, so much so that it couldn't even be seen in the wing mirrors. Essentially, those were the words written by Robin Miller, give or take. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but that was what he used as an analogy. And then he goes on to talk about how IndyCar is so good at shooting itself in the foot. And that book ends with a twang of positivity for 2021, having got through the pandemic. Roger Penske, you know, there's a feel good about IndyCar, and almost that feel good has kind of evaporated. And yeah, that's been my story of the season, and I've given you quite a long segment on that. But I do think that with the Penske scandal and with Roger Penske and Mark Miles, and Mark Miles consistently, it's not once or twice, it's now quite consistent with the mess that seems to be made. I feel like this IndyCar season has been under a little bit of a shadow.
Yeah, I think this is all kind of come to a head with Mark Miles's recent comments as well, and I'd urge listeners to go back to our Nashville preview, the kind of latter part of that episode. We dig into a lot of that. My story of the season is just the Penske push to pass saga, just because it was something so unprecedented. Like, obviously, I've touched on this earlier with the whole Newgarden situation and how that's kind of changed the perception of him. And, you know, on his side, it definitely was something I feel like was felt throughout the season. And again, on McLaughlin's side, like, give those points back to him, and it looks like he'd be the champion. I know, obviously, things could have panned out differently, but it's kind of it just feels like a seismic moment that really will be looked back on for a long time to come. You know, I'll never forget the press conference that Newgarden himself called, and kind of just the raw emotions at that point, and whether that was the right thing to do or not, it's quite hard to say. You know, I think that only really enhanced the mixed messaging that came from it. You know, Newgarden's tale of, oh, well, I thought there was a rule change. You know, Newgarden didn't doubt, you know, why is the push to pass active when he could access it. So it was all just a bit of a kind of bewildering story. You know, I think it was exacerbated, obviously, by the fact it all emerged 6 weeks after the actual fact. And a win had never been overturned. I think it had happened once, but it was then given back. So it's something so unprecedented, and obviously caused so much skepticism through the paddock. In many ways, it feels like it put a bit of a target on Penske's back and added to a bit of kind of doubt in. Yeah, I guess it kind of did somewhat fuel the doubt in the series leadership. And, I think by all accounts, Roger Penske wasn't happy. And, I don't doubt that, he wasn't going to be involved in this. I don't see any chance that he knew about this. But, it raised obviously a lot of questions. Why didn't Chevy see it? Why didn't these top engineers at IndyCar's top team kind of notice that this software wasn't as it should be? And obviously we then had all the sanctions, those internal sanctions that meant Roger Penske had made key personnel miss the month of May, and that only added a dimension to a month of May that Penske then went on to dominate. And ultimately over time I doubt any more will really come out about this, and we have to believe what has been given and told as the truth. But I don't think we'll ever know the answers for sure. It was just such a kind of significant thing at the time.
I've gone a bit different. The Arrow McLaren driver saga. That was a story and a half. David Malukas all got it, but got dropped quite dramatically, and I'd say somewhat unexpectedly. Then we had Callum Milo. Is he going to drop out of WEC to fill in McLaren? Then it was the Porsche. Okay, Porsche's here. He's our future. He's locked in the rest of the season. We're going to test him on ovals. He's going to be fantastic. F2 champion. Started his life in IndyCar quite well. Suddenly is going swimmingly. Oh, in comes Nolan Seal. Goodbye, Mr. Porsche. And then I think it got really weird after the Auto Hebdo article, and then him returning to replace Rossi, I think was just the most bewildering thing of it all, where it was this whole, what's happened with Porsche behind the scenes, something clearly has gone wrong. And then a week after this all comes out, it's, actually, no, you can replace Rossi. It was so bizarre, and we haven't got an explanation to that either, and I don't know if we ever will. But Porsche came to Toronto, loving life, and nothing had ever happened. And did replacing Siegel pay off? Short term, probably not. Long term, it may do. But that whole story was just absolutely fascinating with sort of the real disappointment that Malukas did miss out on an opportunity before, the hope of us seeing Ilott, which didn't pan out, and then the excitement of having such a name as Porsche in the series suddenly being dropped for this 19-year-old third in points in Indy Next, and then Porsche suddenly returning completely out of the blue. It was such an interesting story as the season developed, and we'll never know the answer, but it was fascinating. It was fascinating.
And Zach Brown continues to insist it's all Alex Pallou's fault.
Yes, and that's the bizarre thing. You chose to drop Porsche. You chose not to pick Ilott. You chose to drop Malukas. Yes, Palou would be in that seat otherwise, but you can't just still blame him for something that happened 2 years ago. It's the ball was still in your court for the entirety of this season. You chose to change your drivers. So, bizarre.
And I also read a report on the Indy Star from some of the latest court documents. They actually tried to sign Marcus Ericsson.
Yes.
When Palou didn't join the team, and he already had a verbal agreement with Andretti. So, another name to throw in the hat.
As we said, Unsung Hero, regular listeners, you'll know about our funny moments of the season. Now, I think we know the winner, so let's give some of our favourites otherwise.
Let's talk about the winner first.
Should we? Yeah, let's talk about that. It's got to be Alabama and the Flying Georgina coming out the sky to land trackside. Luca Giotto will be remembered for absolutely nothing apart from murdering this mannequin on the side of the track.
Luca Giotto, who now owns the wrist that he decapitated.
Oh, does he?
I'm sure I saw a picture of him with at least he signed the wrist or something.
I thought it smashed into a million pieces.
Well, I also thought that. And then the pictures that emerged afterwards of Scott McLaughlin after winning the race, sitting with Georgina in the media centre. Oh, the whole thing. I mean, it seemed to get funnier as time went on. That evening, I just kept on watching the video. I just could not contain myself. I think Hinch completely lost it on the broadcast, but I don't think it would have been as funny. It would have still been hilarious. It wouldn't have been as funny if she just fell flat on her back. I think it was the fact that she fell directly down and like stood up for a split second before then tumbling over. I mean, poor Luca Giotto, like he probably didn't know about these mannequins. What would he have been thinking? Like, I'll just never forget when it first cut to the camera, just the mannequin lying trackside. Oh, they've got to secure her properly next year. My word.
Yeah, so the Fittipaldi's reaction was, I think it was the first car to see it, and his reaction was absolutely hilarious. I can't remember word for word. But
something like the lady just fell from the bridge, in like a really panicked tone.
And then it was the fact that Rob crashed about 5 laps afterwards, and everybody thought it was falling mannequin.
Yeah,
as well, which was that was. Yeah, I mean, we'll probably never see something as funny as that for years, but I mean, it made IndyCar somewhat viral. It's just the fact we try and promote IndyCar as such a professional series. It should be respected where it isn't, and then something like this happens, and it's just like the most comedic thing you'll see in motorsports all year. So, dear.
Do you want me to get into some more that I have listed down?
Yeah, we will both agree on Chip Ganassi's tweet.
Yes, I'll just read that out. I'll give a couple of honourable mentions. I'm still obsessed with Graham Rahall's point at Christian Rasmussen, where he just really angrily taps his head, and then it was the way that he pointed at him. That I know McLaughlin had the whole applauding power in Toronto, but Rahall's was just so like you could just tell he was so angry with the whole thing. It was like he was casting a spell on Rasmussen. I think any press conference that Will Power was involved in, I think after Georgina, he was like just going crazy about, oh my God, what if the lady falls in my cockpit? And then he was singing when, I can't remember what the race was,
Portland.
Was it Portland? He burst into song when the mic wasn't working. He was doing a mic test. The first Milwaukee race was absolutely hilarious with Will Power, Connor Daly, and Pato O'Ward. They were basically just doing a talk show, but Toronto really was the weekend that I think we got the most gifts. Tony Kanaan, just before the whole Pourchaire situation, when Pourchaire first released his statement, had said like something to do with putting a plan into action soon. Genuinely, like a day or two later, Rossi crashes, breaks his thumb, and Pourchaire ends up in the car. I don't think that was the plan. Maybe it was the plan, but it was
just unbelievable time.
I think what I said at the time was, maybe it wasn't the plan, but it certainly was a plan. But yeah, my funny moment of the year, I genuinely think this it can't trump Georgina, but my second funny moment of the year is Chip Ganassi's tweet after qualifying in Toronto, where, let me read it out. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our worst qualifying effort ever. But this team never gives up. We can win from there. It's just the fact that he just announces it like you'd expect. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our best qualifying ever. No. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our worst qualifying ever. That's my favourite tweet that I've seen all year.
I think in terms of tweets, my funny moment is, again, recency bias, but Scott McLaughlin, the stage is yours, because watching, you know how every year before Laguna Seca they go to the golf course and they'd all take pictures with the Astor Cup. I remember vividly the one they did with the Championship 5 in 2022, and looking at all the pictures for 2024, and you got your Will Power who's challenging Alex Palou, and Scott McLaughlin is in every single one of those pictures, knowing full well he has zero chance of winning the championship, because soon as the race goes green, Scott McLaughlin will be eliminated from the championship. But they have to put him there on the off chance that Alex Palou dies in the 12 hours between the shoot and the Sunday race, which it made me chuckle. And then, of course, McLaughlin's tweets inviting Palou over for sushi before then inviting him to steal a couple of Graham Rahall's motorbikes and then going skydiving, and Palou taking it all in good humour. I think that's what kind of makes IndyCar quite unique, in that the drivers are comfortable enough with each other that they can do that in jest. But it was just the fact that every single photo had McLaughlin looking slightly like a lemon in it. And I really enjoyed it in that weird kind of way. It was just like these two dead serious, the meme of like the three dragons. There's two like dead serious looking ones, and then there's a slightly goofy looking one. That was like McLaughlin on the side of every single championship photo, because as we've already talked about, probably the most impressive driver of the year. But at the same time, he was not in the championship mix, and as a result, he was just there like the friend when you can, like Will Power was asked to bring his little brother along to the shoots with the trophy.
I also, if you harsh your minds back to Long Beach, Mario Andretti saying his engineers thought he was a pussy is still one of my personal favourites. So,
oh my word, there's probably loads we're forgetting as well. Yeah. At some point, I need to listen back to like the funny moment segment of all of our episodes from the year.
As we always do, we'll end off with the news of the week because straight after off-season, we've obviously got bits and bobs to do. As you said, Felix Rosenqvist renewed his contract with Meyer-Shank, as we touched on earlier, but a bit more driver news. So we'll go into Marcus Armstrong first. As we expected, Ganassi will be downsizing from 5 cars to 3 cars, leaves no space for him or Linus Lundqvist. He's off to Meyer-Shank Racing alongside Felix Rosenqvist to replace the departing David Malukas. We know he's got a good amount of budget.
I don't mind the move for him, to be honest. I think he'll do all right there at Meyer-Shank. He's keeping his core engineering team from Ganassi as well, given the alliance that's coming. So I guess that's a little bit of continuity. He was in the top 10 8 times this year. I think he finished in the top five 3 or 4 times as well. Obviously got the podium in Detroit. 3 of his top 5s were on oval. 3 of his top 10s were on ovals as well. Given he's an oval rookie, that wasn't too bad at all, really. Yeah, I guess kind of it should be a smoothish transition given the alliance, but not much to say on that, really.
Not too much different, will it? For him, would be quite similar. I'm more excited for this one. Callum Ilott will be back with Prema next season. We obviously spoke to Callum at the start of the year about his future, and he was confident he'd come back and find a way at some point. But I think there was doubts of how he was performing at WEC because he was performing well. He won the race in Spa, came second in Qatar, and there were suggestions earlier in the year that he might sign a factory deal. Those have died down a little bit. But I see IndyCar as Ilott's home. We know how things unfortunately end in 2023 for him, but as you sort of said earlier, I think when you compare him directly against Grosjean, they perform pretty similarly. I would also say Juncos took a step forward this season compared to last season. So it's great to see him back. He will likely be in a team leader role. We expect it alongside Robert Schwartzman, but that's not confirmed yet. But it's great to see Callum back, another Brit in the field, which we obviously really like back here, and it'll probably be the forefront of the British drivers in the grid next year. And he's leading a new project. He's got a big role. He is in a team leader role. He's a driver with the experience. He's going to be leading this team in their early phasing. So we've seen what he can do. He's still not the complete package by any means, but it's a really exciting move, and I'm glad to see him back.
I thought it was interesting. Also, it's like a just for 2025 type move, which I think is interesting. There was no like kind of no notion of a sort of a multi-year deal in any of the statements, which. I mean, I guess for a new team, that's not a bad thing to, I guess if Ilott performs well, it's good for him that he doesn't lock him down for too long, because at the end of the day, when he shows that kind of talent that, not that went missing, but it's kind of difficult when he was in that 6 car to consistently perform as well as he could, just because quite simply he wasn't getting that kind of continuity, not knowing whether he was in or out. I mean, finished 11th in St. Pete, and then again, a strong 11th at the Indianapolis 500. And the only reason why I remember he was 11th at the Indy 500 was because the graphics didn't go off the screen as Newgarden was crossing the line. And that is my biggest annoyance of this. Well, not my biggest annoyance of the season. One of my, it's like this great moment. And then there's just like this floating graphic on the screen. And that is how it will be remembered, just because NBC Sports couldn't do their roll up properly. The only time this year that it's gone wrong, and it was at the Indy 500. But like for Ilott, I think, this is another opportunity. It's a new proving ground, and I do hope that Prema are competitive, because we've seen the struggle that can be had when a team enters. How difficult it was when Juncos first came in, but this isn't some kind of grassroots organization. This is one of the most elite outfits in European motorsport coming into a series where they 100% can be successful.
Yeah, I think for that reason, it's a really shrewd pickup from Prema, because, Ilott has been in this position before in IndyCar, albeit at that point it was a single car operation, whereas here it will be, he'll have the teammate. Back then, I mean, he wasn't really even having sim time. He didn't have any data as a rookie to really compare himself to. And there are a few differences when he joined JHR. They had a bit of carryover from Carlin, but Then again, Prema are going to have, I think they're kind of going to do a blend of their existing personnel. And as you said, they are kind of operating at an elite level and also kind of blending that with people who are kind of aware of the culture over in the US and have experience in IndyCar. So I think, yeah, to have Ilott, who's been in this position of kind of building a team up from its infancy, as much as it doesn't. Prema and Juncos are very different statures when they're stepping into IndyCar. Obviously, Juncos has had all their experience in the American ladder. Prema have obviously done it on a wider stage. But yeah, I agree with what you said, Dan. That actually Juncos, it feels like they've made a step forward this year. And to be fair, I think Ilott, kind of his role in helping to build that team up is part of that, and the fact that Grosjean still didn't trump the as much as it was pretty even. He still finished a place behind where Ilott was last year in the standings, however many few points behind. So I think again that kind of just proves Ilott's caliber, because I think there was this concern going into the year that, well, maybe Grosjean comes in and finishes, I don't know, 11th, 12th in the championship, and all of a sudden, where everyone's crediting Ilott for the job that he's doing at JHR, suddenly they look at it like maybe he wasn't doing such a good job. But I think I was particularly impressed this year with the 500. Actually, his weight jacker failed on the laps to the start, and he essentially started at the back. And by the end, yeah, he was on the brink of the top 10. It was amusing that the graphics failed at like the worst possible moment. That's the only thing that tarnished that like just unbelievable emotion-ridden moment.
Hello listeners, Future Dan here. Now, since the recording of this episode, IndyCar formally announced the introduction of the new charter system. We're not going to talk about it in this episode, but if you head back to episode 71, more of our thoughts on the topic are there. We're also going to speak about it in a future episode, so don't worry about that. Now, back to the ending of this episode. Throughout this off-season, we're going to be giving you various different segments. So every week we're going to do something slightly different. We'll have sort of maybe a featured topic of the week in each off-seasoning episode. We may do a little 1v1 quiz. There's various different things. I think we've previously touched on testing out IndyCar sponsored items at some point. But there'll be loads of different segments. But one thing we are going to do every week is go through a delve of the IndyCar history books. So we've done a bit of maths. There are 24 weeks until IndyCar returns on the streets of St. Petersburg. And what we are going to do is we are going to go right from IndyCar start back in 1905 as the first trace of American single-seater racing, and give you a little fun fact every single week or every single week for a 5-year period until we get up to the modern day, which will take us very nicely onto the streets of St. Petersburg to kick off the IndyCar season. So each week, myself or Archie will give you a little fun fact. We'll alternate every week, but we're going to go right back to IndyCar's start. Well, I shouldn't call it IndyCar because it's not called IndyCar. The history is very confusing. We're not here for the history. We're here for the fun facts. So I'm going to take you back to 1905 for this episode, which I said was sort of the first recognised circuit championship in America. Now, this isn't my fact, but one thing I did want to share with you is cast your minds back to the Christmas special. Do you remember a particular man, Archie?
One of the birthday boys.
Yes. Do you remember who the birthday boy was? The more significant birthday boy.
Was it Louis Chevrolet? Is that? It
was Louis Chevrolet. So I
can't believe I've remembered that accurately.
That's impressive. That's impressive. Well done to the any fans who remember that. Louis Chevrolet, as we mentioned, the Christmas special, born on Christmas Day and obviously founder of the Chevrolet car company. So the first ever sort of, we'll call it IndyCar for simplicity reasons, race held in June 10th, 1905 at Morris Park, which is in New York State. I believe it was a dirt oval. It was a 3.5 lap race of a distance of 5 miles. So 2 laps of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the equivalent. The winner was Louis Chevrolet. So a good friend there. Won the first sort of ever IndyCar race, which is quite a little fun fact there. But that's not actually my fact. So I'm going to take you over to 1909. So IndyCar's history is very confusing. So 1905 had a champion. But we'll fast forward to next season in 1909, where a national champion wasn't declared. So this has had a lot of historical debate, actually. Is there a champion for 1909? Which is what I'm going to present to you this week. So, as I said, there was no official champion from sort of the association for this season, sort of all just for a fun thing. A champion, I think, wasn't declared until 1916 there afterwards. So what they did, they had an American sort of magazine, an automobile journal, and they crowned the champion as Bert Dingley as a de facto champion. He was named by a man called Chris Sinzabor, an editor at this magazine, based upon merit and track performance. However, this is not the end of the story, because in 1927, the association retroactively applied the later point system to go all the way back to 1909. This happened for future seasons as well, which didn't quite have the same points format, but the new points format introduced decided to go back all the way and judge those seasons off the new points format they introduced, which meant Dingley retained his champion, and although there was still no official championship, he was sort of crowned the champion. However, this is still not the end, because we fast forward to 1951, so we're 42 years after the season happened. This is when sort of the motorsport grew in America, and this was more significant. So there's a sports writer named Russ Catlin, and he made his own point standings for this period. So I've got the official list here. It was done on quite a few different aspects. He sort of made his own point system. I can't tell you exactly how it works, because, as I said, it's all very confusing. But with Catlin's system, he actually awarded the championship to a man called George Robertson as the title. So many sort of publications and journals actually crown George Robertson as a champion from 1909 because of the point system that Catlin put in, instead of the initial one based in 1927. So in 1951, as I said, their championships were reworked, and it sort of stopped the traditional champion and gave it to George Robertson, although this sort of has to be seen as unofficial because there was no championship. So that's my fun fact of the week. So the 1909 champion, there was no champion, but there was also two champions at the same time, depending on what historian you go off or what time period you go off. So I think it's more recognised that it's Robertson as a champion due to Catlin's methods, but it's still up for debate.
That is very enlightening.
So there we are. So this we're going to do every single week. So Archie will take us to next week from 1910 to 1915. And as we said, we'll have 24 weeks, which will take you to 2024 and into 2025. So hopefully you enjoy it, and it'll be something to keep an eye on throughout the off-season. That's it. That's our season review. We have delved not into every corner because there's a million corners to delve into, but we have got 6 months to do that and given our overview of some of what we thought about the season, our drivers of the season, highlight surprises, all that sort of stuff, and to give you a little outlook. And obviously we will continue that. Me and Archie will be back next week for the annual IndyCar driver review tier list. It was my favorite episode last year, so I'm really looking forward to this one. It's gonna be really fun. But James, I've got to thank you for joining us this time. It was great to have you on. You'll obviously be welcome back in the future. Hope you enjoyed, and great to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and really enjoyed that. That was good fun, and I think it was quite nice picking up off each other, because it's a complete surprise, like not knowing what we'd pick. But like they say, get great minds picking up off what we thought about. So yeah, that was pretty good fun. Thanks, guys.
So as I highlighted at the start, this certainly is not the end for us. We will still be going all 6 months, no matter what we need to do. We'll find a way, as we did last year, to grind through the 6 months of off-seasoning. But that is our official 2024 season review. So for the viewers and listeners, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we will see you next time.